So I'd like to talk a little bit about the different types of inspections. I know that most people get a general inspection, but there are tons of other inspections out there, like radon, mold, pest, lead, well water if you don't have city water. Can you talk a little bit about each of those, what they are, why they're important? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously the most common home inspection is the home inspection. That's the most common inspection. But there are a host of other types of inspections that, depending on the house, depending on the basement, depending on a lot of other factors, whether it's out in the country, so it has a well and septic, there could be other inspections that you would want to purchase and have done. I will talk about kind of the big five, and then I'll go into some of the more kind of uncommon inspections. But the big five are going to be the home, termite, and pest inspection. And that is basically, we're looking for wood destroying insects. There's like 3 to 5 different types in Ohio. So those are the things that we're looking for. So we're walking around. It's a much less time intensive because you're only focusing on those specific things, like the outside. Termites come from the ground. So that's a shorter inspection. It's cheaper. Usually that costs around $50 to $75. And sometimes I do discounts for when you add that on. And that comes with its own separate report. Sometimes banks, certain loans require a termite inspection. And some areas in Ohio are more prone to that. So sometimes when you're buying in certain areas, you're going to kind of just do a pest inspection because if you're buying in that area. And then radon is another big one. Radon is a gas. It's a radioactive gas that comes from the ground. And they've kind of figured out that Ohio is high in radon in most areas. Not every house is high in radon, but Ohio as a state has a lot of radon in the ground. And over time, they figured out, kind of like they did with smoking. They used to not know that smoking caused cancer, and so everybody smoked, right? Well, they figured this out years down the road. They figured out that radon is actually the second largest cause of lung cancer. And the reason that is it's a gas that comes up through your basement floor, through cracks and things like that. And it just kind of naturally, as it breaks down, it puts little particles into the air. Those particles then get breathed in by the people as they're hanging out in the basement. And over time, it's a long period of time, but over time, radon breathed into the lungs. If it lands on your skin, it's fine. It's really the breathing in of those little particles that attach to dust, and they breathe it in. So we have machines that can test the radon concentrations in a basement. Usually I tell people, if you are buying the house and it's maybe an older house, it's kind of an older basement, you're not planning on finishing it and spending a bunch of time down there, then you most likely could pass on the radon test. That's not it's not a needed. However, I always recommend it for any house that has a finished basement and you're going to spend time there because especially if you have kids and stuff. I mean, if you're buying this house to live there for a while, you kind of want to know what the levels of radon and the EPA gets a certain amount, and if it's below that, they say it's safe. If it's above that, then you can do a mitigation system, which
What is that?
So it's a pretty simple concept. It's basically hiring a company. It costs about $800 to $1,200, somewhere around there. So it's not like a huge cost. And they come in and basically they'll take a pipe and they cut a hole in the floor. And the idea is that they're sealing this pipe to have access to the air, to the radon basically that's underneath the slab in your basement. And then that pipe goes up and outside, and it has a blower motor or like a pump motor that's basically sucking that radon out. So the whole concept is, suck the radon and put it out into the air so it's not in the basement. And it's a very normal procedure. It's not that it's not very costly. And that's a pretty simple way to fix radon. And then the last two that I do are well tests, and septic tests. So if you're buying a house that's outside of the city, you're most likely going to have wells and septics for your sewer. So the thing with well is what we do is we go in and we run the water for 30 minutes. We're flushing out the system. And the idea there is that we're kind of testing, make sure the pump is pumping, the well is actually working. Turn 3 faucets on, make sure that the house is getting water and there's enough pressure. And then we're flushing it out by running it 30 minutes. And at the end, we take a water sample. And that water sample is testing for bacteria. So if you're buying a house that has a well, there's a little bit of maintenance with a well. You want to do a water test. They recommend it once a year. And basically you're just testing to make sure that the well is clean, that there's no harmful bacteria, especially if you're drinking the water. Mm-hmm. But even for showers, you know, that can get in your pores. So you're testing for a couple of bacteria. It's a very easy test, but very important for buying and making sure that the well is working properly. And then, of course, septic. I think septic kind of is a no-brainer. A septic, if it's bad, can be a large chunk of money, you know, 15 to 20K. Right. So you hire a septic. I don't do septic inspections, but I coordinate and have a septic inspector that does this every day to show up. And they're just running water with dye, and they're making sure that it's been pumped and that it's operating properly and it's in good shape, which is very important if you're buying a house, to make sure that those two things are working right and safe and all that good stuff. So those are kind of the big five. Other inspections that people do, there's like mold inspections. Those are honestly pretty rare because most mold that we see is of smaller areas and it's easily taken care of. The mold inspections, or they call them mold tests, that I will recommend is if I walk into a house and it's there's a situation where maybe it's been vacant for a while. There's been a lot of mold comes from water, from moisture. So if there's a moisture problem, there can be mold. And if I believe that because of whatever situation I'm seeing with my eyes, that maybe it's been dripping for a while, it's growing through drywall, which if I think it's inside the walls or it's in a place up in the attic underneath a place where I can't see it, that's when I would recommend like a further mold test. And that is like a special equipment that a specific mold tester. I don't do mold tests, but there's guys out there that have these special equipment. They go in and they actually will drill holes and go inside the wall, and they're testing the air quality for mold spores. So those are, again, pretty rare. That's like a very specific situation that I would recommend something like that. Another test that sometimes comes up for certain types of loans is a lead test. And lead is typically what they're talking about is, I guess you can test paint for lead. That's pretty rare, but mostly lead is in the water. And so the reason they're testing for lead in the water usually has to do with young kids. Kids are very susceptible to lead in the water. And so if there's old lead pipes and things in the house, you can have lead in the water. So those are kind of some of the other kind of common but not so common types of inspections that you can get into.